In the Egyptian resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh, a message of cautious optimism echoed across the international stage. Standing before the cameras, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi declared that the Gaza ceasefire agreement opens a new era of peace and stability. The announcement came as the region took its first collective breath after 2 years of devastating war, a conflict that left tens of thousands dead, entire neighborhoods erased and generations scarred. For Egypt, long at the crossroads of Middle Eastern diplomacy, this was more than a political statement. It was a moral commitment. In his address, President Al-Sisi reaffirmed Egypt's role as both mediator and architect of reconstruction. He said, Egypt will work with the United States in coordination with all partners in the coming days to lay the foundations for the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip without delay. We intend to organize a conference on early recovery, reconstruction and development, which will build on your Trump's plan to end the war. The reference to President Donald Trump's plan underscores Washington's renewed involvement in the Middle East, this time through diplomacy framed around rebuilding rather than confrontation. Trump's so-called Gaza Recovery Compact has become the central pillar of post-war negotiations, offering billions in aid tied to verifiable peace commitments. For Al-Sisi, this moment symbolizes a turning point, not just for Gaza, but for the region's trust in peace. He continued, there is a glimmer of hope that this agreement will close a painful chapter in human history and usher in a new era of peace and stability in the Middle East. Behind these words lies a stark reality. Gaza's humanitarian collapse has been unprecedented. Over 67,000 people killed, 169,000 injured, and nearly 90% of the population displaced. Hospitals, schools, and entire power grids lie in ruins. Now, as the guns fall silent, the challenge of rebuilding begins, not only in concrete and steel, but in dignity and trust. The proposed Cairo Reconstruction Conference is expected to gather leaders, investors, and aid organizations from across the globe. Early pledges already exceed $70 billion, with commitments from Qatar, the European Union, and the United States. The funds aim to rebuild housing, medical facilities, and essential infrastructure, but also to revive Gaza's economy through trade zones and vocational programs. Observers note that Egypt's leadership in this process reflects both its proximity and its credibility. For decades, Cairo has served as a conduit between Israel and Hamas, sometimes quietly, often at great diplomatic risk. This time, however, Al-Sisi's government insists that reconstruction will not repeat the mistakes of the past. Egyptian officials emphasize that the plan will include independent oversight, ensuring transparency in how funds are used and who benefits. They argue that a sustainable Gaza must be built not on dependency, but on opportunity, on a regional framework that rewards peace with prosperity. Across the Sinai border, preparations are already underway. Engineers are mapping transport corridors for aid convoys. Egyptian forces have increased patrols to secure crossings and ensure that relief supplies flow without interference. The Rafah Gateway, once a symbol of isolation, is being redesigned as a corridor of hope. The symbolism is powerful. Egypt, which once fought wars over Gaza, now leads efforts to rebuild it. And the collaboration with Washington signals a broader alignment, one that unites Western influence with Arab pragmatism. For the United States, this represents a recalibration of foreign policy. Under President Trump, the emphasis has shifted from long-term negotiations to immediate deliverables, ceasefires tied to reconstruction, normalization linked to investment, and humanitarian relief exchanged for verifiable stability. Al-Sisi's endorsement of Trump's approach is no small matter. It places Egypt squarely at the center of a complex web of guarantors, including Qatar, Turkey, and Israel. Nations whose interests often diverge, but who now share a stake in Gaza's recovery. The Egyptian president's remarks also resonate domestically. In a country grappling with its own economic pressures, Egypt's leadership in post-war diplomacy strengthens its regional standing. It also reflects Al-Sisi's consistent narrative that stability in Gaza means security for Egypt. International reaction to his speech was swift. European leaders praised the commitment to peace and reconstruction. The United Nations called Egypt's initiative a critical bridge toward long-term stability. Even Tehran, often skeptical of US-backed plans, cautiously welcomed any framework that guarantees humanitarian access. Still, challenges remain immense. Analysts warn that without genuine political reconciliation between Palestinian factions, even the most generous reconstruction funds could falter. Hamas leaders in Doha and technocrats from the Palestinian Authority are expected to meet in Cairo to discuss governance under the new framework. For now, the fragile ceasefire continues to hold. Israeli hostages have returned home, Palestinian prisoners have been freed, and across Gaza, families are slowly emerging from the ruins, carrying photographs, salvaging memories, and daring to hope. At Sheba Medical Center near Tel Aviv, doctors treating released captives describe them as physically frail but mentally resilient. Meanwhile, in Khan Yunis and Rafah, Palestinian families gathered around makeshift tents, waiting for word on reconstruction assistance. In both nations, the human cost of war is measured not just in lives lost, but in futures delayed. Al-Sisi's call for a new era is therefore more than a diplomatic slogan. It is a plea to rebuild the moral foundation of the region. Egypt's planned conference, expected in the coming weeks, will likely coincide with ongoing US and Qatari mediation efforts. Washington is pushing for a joint oversight committee, while Gulf states advocate for direct community funding to ensure that reconstruction benefits civilians first. The process is complex, the politics fragile. But as Al-Sisi's voice carried across the hall in Sharm el-Sheikh, it reflected something rarely heard in recent years, a sense that peace, while distant, might finally be within reach. In his closing words, the Egyptian president struck a tone both humble and resolute. There is a glimmer of hope, he said, pausing briefly before continuing, that this agreement will close a painful chapter in human history. That glimmer, fragile, uncertain, but real, now defines the region's next chapter. As night fell over the Sinai coast, the conference hall emptied, leaving behind the echo of those words. For Egypt, for Gaza, and for all who have lived through this war, the task ahead is monumental. But perhaps, as Al-Sisi suggested, the first stones of peace have finally been laid, not in triumph, but in the quiet resolve to rebuild what was lost.